Of voices calling for protection of people living with albinism on the continent is increasing. It's unfortunate that on the African continent, people with albinism are targeted and bear the brunt of superstition. People with albinism are demanding authorities around the continent step up the fight to protect their rights. The Africa Disability Alliance is hosting representatives in South Africa of different organizations of persons with albinism from across the continent. Let's find out more. My colleague Blain Herman spoke to Overstone Kondowe, the chairperson of the African Union for Persons with Albinism, and the chairperson of the Africa Disability Alliance, Grace Massah. Blain first asked Grace what some of the myths are about persons living with albinism.
Number one is they say we don't die, we disappear. It happened that I did a study on attitude of persons with albinism in 2005 when I was doing my BSc in nursing. And I gathered a number of myths. And one of it is the one I've said, we don't die, and we produce a bad smell, and we can't marry, among other issues. And that maybe even if somebody sleeps with a person with albinism, they get cured of HIV. Yeah. And so that albinism is contagious.
Overstone, I mean, these beliefs and these superstitions, how does it affect the people living with this condition?
Generally, persons with albinism, they are discriminated from at the community level, even systematically in the mainstream institutional setup, to the extent that most of them, they find themselves out of employment, out of marriage wedlock, and most often families are headed by only a woman, where a man escapes the responsibility, accusing a woman of bringing a child with albinism in that family.
Look, albinism is a congenital disorder, isn't it? It's where people lack the pigmentation of color in their skin, their eyes, their hair. And reportedly, it affects about 1 in every 20,000 people worldwide. Overstone, what is the world's response to this plight?
There is indeed a good response from different sectors, mainly the development partners, like in our country, Malawi. We have seen the UN has taken a lead in fight against the stigma and changing the attitudes of the community in order to accommodate persons with albinism just like anybody else. This has been effected through a number of instruments which have been adopted by different states in Africa through what we call as the Regional Action Plan on Africa, and we've also seen the resolutions from the African Human Rights and People's Commission, and we've also seen some resolution being made at SABC level in order to respond to the growing concerns and challenges facing persons with albinism in the continent.
I mean, Grace, in some parts of Africa, body parts of those living with albinism are believed to have some sort of magical powers, isn't it? How do we combat these perceptions? And tell us about this gathering in Gauteng, and what sort of practical solutions are you looking for?
Basically, I think to change an attitude, it's quite something that you really need to also start changing the environment. And what do you start from? Because people have believed in those myths and misconceptions. And because that's what they have been seeing, and to them, it has been working, but negatively to us. So what is workable is to promote the positive side of persons with people with albinism, because our African society has not much well exposed to how the higher side or the achievements, and to highlight the other life of persons with albinism. We are in minority. Those that have gone far with the school, those that are the achievers in the society, they are not much exposed that they can relate automatically. When they are seen, people would say, I think, indeed, we are wrong. If they see people with albinism going beyond 100 years of age, they would believe to say, I think what we believed is wrong. And even if they see us doing well in school, they would believe to say, I think whatever this we have been seeing is not true. In addition to that, it's also to promote, even using media, promoting the all what surrounds people with albinism, the good side, the positive side of the achievements, and even the lives, even promoting the families, because the issue rests with the family. Today, my parents have children with albinism. As I'm speaking, somebody is giving birth to a child with albinism in my country. What are we communicating to that person? So if we communicate to the general public of the achievements and the successes that a person with albinism, it's a normal person, and the limitation, it's only on the skin, which affects the sight and even the skin from the sun. That would be clear, and you will pass on the message that people would now believe what is right, unlike believing in what has been wrong all along.
Overstone, tell us about the Malawian government's reaction or stance with regards to people living with albinism.
Let me say that Malawi government quickly responded to the upsurge of the attacks. In 2015, they came up with a national response plan. But this one was a response, meaning that cases have to happen, then government must come in. Then in 2018, we changed. We needed an action plan, which is proactive rather than reactive. This national action plan is a robust framework of different activities undertaken by different sectors in our government in order to curb the challenges facing persons with albinism. This one has remained without any funding until this month, when the president committed to fund this national action plan. We are very sure that once this is completed, once it is implemented, the changes that we expect, the changes that every Malawian is expecting, will come to pass, will come to reality.
Yeah. Grace, you from the African Disability Alliance. Tell us about some of the work you've been doing on the continent.
Yeah, basically, I'm the chairperson of the board of the African Disability Alliance since 2015, and my tenure is ending this year. And basically, my main role has been to provide technical governance guidance to the agency, which is based in Pretoria. It's a secretariat, and also to chair all the institutional board meetings. Besides that, I was mandated also to give out the an award and a certificate to governments in Africa that have done well in implementing policies on disability. I've been to Namibia, I've been to Madagascar, even South Africa when there was Zuma, President Zuma, and I've been also to Malawi. I gave the trophy to our own president, Professor Peter Mutharika, for the achievement they have so far done in terms of pushing issues on disabilities and all that concerns issues on disabilities across Africa.
Over your tenure at the African Disability Alliance, what other highlights can you talk to us about in terms of achievements, and also tell us about what pertinent challenges still remain?
Disability has been there since life began, but it has been wrongly defined in terms of the word disability. People look into the dis part, but not considering the other. So that left other groups of people not being included. But in looking into the definition of disability, it looks at the impairment in terms of sight, impairment in terms of the mental abilities. So through my tenure, we have been able to incorporate groups of people that were sidelined in this alliance. For example, people living with people with albinism. People with albinism were not there before because there was a debate to say, should we include them on the people with disabilities? And finally now, there was a clear understanding, and then they have been co-opted. So like African Disability Alliance has co-opted not only people with albinism, but also people with short stature. And we have also people with epilepsy or intellectual disabilities. These are the people that you see, maybe they are born and they really intellectually, they are not picking up well, and the society doesn't take care of them as we expect. We have co-opted them in our alliance, and we have a structure, and we work with them so that they still give out what is needed to the community expected.
Overstone, look, there no doubt is great misunderstanding with regards to albinism. Do you think more needs to be done in our education system, and not at a tertiary or secondary, but at a primary school level, in order to educate the youngsters coming through about albinism? Yes,
one of the strategies which countries in Africa have to use is using the curriculum, because there is a great proportion of our communities that passes through the mainstream schooling. So if we happen to include issues to do with persons with albinism in our curriculum, that means the generation that we may have 10 or 20 years to come will have a positive attitude already towards persons with albinism. That means persons with albinism will be able to be accommodated and integrated in the mainstream society.
Yeah. Grace, as we wrap up, what's your advice to people facing ridicule, facing discrimination? How should they handle it?
The first thing is to still stand and not close the mouth. Use every platform for advocacy, because one voice, it's difficult for people to listen. So I advise for joint advocacy using different forums, and even asking the general public to not only leave it for people with albinism or people who are marginalized, but putting all forces, even including media, the journalists and everyone else, the politicians, but putting it with an intention to serve the general public, which is disadvantaged, and not for their own personal interest. And for people with who are marginalized themselves, they just need to stand strong and also have courage and hope for change, because life will no longer be the same as we are today. Like in my case in Malawi, we believe the killings would end and we would still live. And because it's not our own creation, it's the creation of God, God will still bring people with albinism in Malawi, but they need to find a home that is safe to live.
Overstone, you concur?
Yes, I do 100% support the issue of having a collaborative effort in order to drive a change that we all expect to be in our respective countries. It's not only Malawi. This is a regional problem. That's why, as the African Union for Persons with Albinism, would want to have some regional interventions so that we are able to work together in order to combat or else to address these challenges once for all.
I want to just dig a little deeper with regards to, a bit of empathy with somebody living with albinism. Put us in the shoes of a youth in Africa living with albinism and some of the daily struggles that they go through with regards to misconception, with regards to this perception of myths and discrimination.
Let me be very frank to say that before birth, we are already exposed to a discrimination. Once a child is born with albinism, you find out marriages, families break apart because there are misconceptions. That means this child is brought up in a community by one parent. Most of the time is a woman. And in Africa, most of the men are the breadwinners. That means this one is also deprived of other rights. Like, for example, is not cared sufficiently in terms of basic needs. He grows in a society where teachers have no information about the disability itself. So he also finds himself in a problem of not accessing quality education. At the same time, in other societies, there is also bullying. Some children do not really understand. They will come and prick some hair or skin, trying to explore what a person with albinism is all about. The same person will also need some support, like protective clothing. At the same time, we need the visual aids. Because he's born from a family of a woman who is not a breadwinner, find he's unable to get these services. At the end, he becomes uneducated. Now, the limitation of work. The world of work, most of the time, if you have not done well in education, you find yourself on open sun where you're also exposed to another danger, which is skin cancer. At the same time, don't forget that he is also hunted. So throughout the life cycle, he's always living in fear. The fear itself limits your participation in productive activities, social participation, political participation. So a person with albinism goes through this life cycle. Even if he dies, you find people is looking for the body parts. The remains themselves are also robbed from the graveyard. So the life is not good with a person with albinism, from birth even to death. Even after death, the remains are also robbed off.